me ask you, are you working hard, delivering strong results, and doing everything you've been told leads to success? And yet you're not moving forward. You're not getting pulled into those bigger conversations, and you're not being tapped for the high visibility opportunities. Nobody above you is calling you next level, and you can't figure out why. If that's your reality right now, then this episode is for you because I'm going to give you language for exactly what's happening. Because here's the thing, in most cases, it's not that you're doing something wrong, it's that you're optimizing for the wrong thing. And that is a completely different problem with a completely different solution. So let's get into it. Most high performers operate under a belief that is totally logical and quietly career limiting. The belief is this: if I do great work, it will lead to advancement. And I'm not going to tell you that's wrong. At the beginning of your career, it's mostly true. Early success runs on output, reliability, execution. You do the work, you do it well, you get recognized, you move up. But here's what nobody tells you. At a certain point, the rules change. The game shifts underneath you, and you don't get a memo on it. So you keep doing what worked. You stay late, you deliver flawlessly, you become the person your manager calls when something absolutely cannot fail, because you're the person. You become, in the truest sense of the word, indispensable. And that sounds like the goal, right? That sounds like exactly where you want to be. But here's the trap hiding inside that word. Indispensable in your current role and promotable to the next role are not the same thing, not even close. In fact, they can actively work against each other. I want to tell you about a discovery that came out of the Center for Creative Leadership, one of the most rigorous leadership research institutions in the world. And for years, they were trying to solve a specific puzzle. They were studying leaders who had derailed, not underperformers, high performers, people who had risen fast, who were considered stars, who had every reason to keep climbing. And then they stalled. They got passed over. They quietly plateaued. The researchers kept asking why. Was it intelligence? No. Was it poor relationships? Well, sometimes, but that was not the consistent pattern. Was it work ethic? Absolutely not. These were some of the hardest working people in their organizations. So what was it? Well, what they kept finding across study after study, industry after industry, was something they came to call over-reliance on strengths. And here's what that means. The very behaviors that made someone successful at one level, the thoroughness, the responsiveness, the technical mastery, the flawless execution, these became the behaviors that limited them at the next level. Not because those strengths went away, but because they crowded out the development of the new skills that the next level required. Think about it for a second. The better you are at your current job, the more reinforced those behaviors become. And so the harder it can be to make the shift that the next level demands. The Center for Creative Leadership called it one of the most consistent patterns in leadership research. Not lack of talent, not lack of effort, over-reliance on the very things that made you great. So here's what that looks like in real life. You become the most reliable person on the team, so you get the most work. You deliver brilliantly, which makes you more reliable, which means you get even more work. You become the most responsive. You always have an answer. You always come through. You always say yes. You become the most thorough. Nothing goes without being checked twice. You're meticulous in a way that people have come to depend on. And then a leadership role opens up. And the people above you have a conversation. And someone in that room says, well, we can't move her. She's too critical where she is. And that sentence is delivered like a compliment. It sounds like praise. But what it actually signals is, we see you as an executor, and we need this role filled by a leader. I had a client, Lauren. Lauren was exceptional. Every project was flawless. Every deadline met. Her manager trusted her completely. She was the first call when anything important came in. So, of course, a leadership role opened up on her team, and Lauren felt confident. She had the track record, she had the relationship, she had the results, and she had, by any objective measure, definitely earned it. And as you might guess, she didn't get it. And the feedback she got was, "We just see you as so critical where you are." She came to our first session and she had that feedback. She wasn't really sure whether to feel proud or devastated because it sounded like a compliment, but it had not produced the outcome that she had worked so hard for. And what we had to work through together was this: their very behaviors that made Lauren exceptional, the reliability, the thoroughness, the consistent execution, those had defined the box that leadership had put her in. She had become indispensable as a doer. Nobody was seeing her as a leader, not because she wasn't capable of leading, but because she hadn't learned to demonstrate it. She hadn't learned to send the leadership signal. So, if doing great work is not the whole answer, what are high performers actually missing? Well, here's the shift. And I'm going to say it plainly. High performers focus on doing the work. Rising leaders focus on shaping the work. And those two are very different, completely different signals. And they create two completely different impressions in the minds of the people above you. Here's a piece of research that is stunning. It started as a study about something else entirely and ended up revealing something that completely reframes how we think about advancement. In the 1990s, McKinsey researchers were trying to understand what separated senior leaders who had real organizational impact from those who didn't. Not high performers versus low performers, high performers versus other high performers, people who had already cleared the bar of strong execution. And here's what they kept finding: the differentiator wasn't effort. It wasn't even results necessarily. It was what they described as the ability to think and communicate at multiple levels simultaneously. The leaders who rose the fastest, who had the most impact, they could hold operational detail in one hand and strategic implication in the other hand. They could talk about what they were doing and why it mattered and what decision it informed, almost in the same breath. Whereas the ones who plateaued were extraordinarily good at the operational detail, but they had never been pushed to develop the layer above that. And when the researchers looked at how these two groups communicated their work in meetings, in updates, in conversations with leadership, the difference was stark. The rising leaders weren't saying more, they weren't working harder, they were doing one thing different. They were adding perspective to their output. Not just, here's what I did, but here's what it means, here's what it changes, here's what I think we should do next. And that one layer of interpretation, that was the signal that separated operators from leaders. So let me make that concrete. 3 specific shifts. Let's look at them. Shift number 1, from execution to perspective. Most high performers lead with the work. I completed the analysis, I finished the report, I wrapped up the client meeting. They're accurate, they're professional, and it signals reliable executor. A rising leader adds the sentence, here's what the analysis suggests we should do next. Or the client meeting clarified the decision we need to make before Q3. It's the same work. It's one sentence. It's just a totally different signal. Senior leaders aren't managing tasks. They're managing decisions. So when you frame your work as informing a decision rather than just completing a task and checking it off, then you're speaking their language. Shift number 2, from responsiveness to direction. High performers are excellent at being responsive. Someone asks, they answer. Someone identifies a problem, they solve it. Someone needs something, and they deliver. It's great quality. Keep your great quality. But rising leaders also initiate. They don't just respond to the agenda. They shape the agenda. They come into meetings prepared not just to answer questions, but to frame issues. They say things like, before we get into the details, here's the decision I believe we need to make by the end of this conversation. And that framing, that giving the room direction rather than just waiting for direction, it's one of the most powerful signals of leadership readiness that there is. And you can do it right now in your current role without a title change. Shift 3 is moving from reliability to visibility of thinking. And this is a big one. This is the one that most high performers resist, not because they disagree, but because it's uncomfortable. Senior leaders don't just want results. They want to see how you think. They want to see your reasoning. They want to see your judgment. They want to know, how do you weigh the trade-offs? How do you arrive at a perspective? And if you're someone who just presents the polished, complete work with all the messy thinking hidden, you may be inadvertently hiding the very thing that would make leadership trust you at the next level. Research from organizational psychology is really clear on this. People are perceived as significantly more capable, more leader-like when they give a sketch of their reasoning, not just their results. Not because the reasoning is always right, but because visible thinking signals that there is a thinker behind the work. And that's what leadership is looking for. And I'm not saying to go into detail after detail after detail. That's not what they're looking for. It's just they want to see the thinker. They want to see the thinking so that they know that you are that thinker. Daniel, one of my clients, brilliant guy, highly respected by his team and his peers, and his work was consistently strong. He's the kind of person you want on your team. You want on the important project because you know it's going to get done and you know it's going to get done well. And yet, every performance conversation landed in the same place. Daniel, you're doing great. Just keep doing what you're doing. Sounds fine until you realize that just keep doing what you're doing is the organizational equivalent of being parked. It means we see you where you are. We're not thinking about you somewhere else. So we started working together and we went looking for the real problem. And as you might imagine, it wasn't performance, it wasn't relationships, it was a visibility issue, a very specific kind of one. He was totally invisible at the level above, and not because he wasn't doing great work, but because his work arrived as outputs, clean, complete, professional, with none of the thinking that produced them visible to anyone. And he never said what he recommended. He rarely shared the implications. He presented results, and he waited to be told what to do next. So, to the leaders above his direct manager, the people who'd eventually be in the room when his name came up for a senior role, Dano was a name on a project list, not a perspective, not a voice, not a presence. So here's what we did. Every time Daniel presented his work, in a meeting, in an email update, in a conversation with his manager, he added 3 things. He added what it meant, what he recommended, and what the decision was that it informed. 3 sentences appended to work he was already doing. And what happened was very curious. He started getting invited to meetings he hadn't been invited to before. He started being asked for his perspective, not his technical perspective only, but his strategic perspective. And when those types of things start happening, that's when you're on the road. You know you're on the path towards elevation to the next level. Now, here's the thing. Those behaviors that kept you stuck, they are not character flaws. They're learned behaviors that were rewarded repeatedly, often for years, over-delivering, going above and beyond every time. It comes from genuinely wanting to add value and to prove you're serious, to be someone that people can count on. Saying yes to everything comes from caring about the output, caring about the team, and not wanting to let people down. That's not a bad instinct. And at many career stages, that's exactly the right instinct. The problem isn't the instinct. The problem is when that instinct becomes the only mode that you operate in. and when it calcifies into habits that no longer serve the level you're trying to reach. Adam Grant found that the highest contributors in organizations, the people doing the most and helping the most and delivering the most, are often the least likely to advocate for their own visibility. They're so oriented toward contribution that self-promotion feels almost antithetical to who they are. And the result is that people adding the most value are sometimes the least visible people, running hard in a direction that doesn't always lead where they think it's going to lead. So if that sounds like you, hear this. What helped you succeed earlier can quietly cap your growth later, not because you did anything wrong, just the game changed and you're still playing by the old rules. So let's talk about what you can do differently. Let's talk about 3 specific shifts. Add 1 sentence is the first one of perspective to every significant update. This is your minimum viable change. And it's way more powerful than it sounds. Before you send that email, before you close that meeting update, before you end that conversation with your manager, add 1 sentence that says what the work means. Not what you did, what it means. This puts us ahead of the Q2 timeline, which gives us flexibility if the product launch shifts. This analysis surfaced a risk I believe we need to decide on before the end of the month. This resolves the immediate issue, and it also signals something bigger we should probably talk about. It's 1 sentence, and you're going to add it every time. Do it for a month, and watch what changes. Number 2, be sure you're always speaking up early in meetings. Most high performers wait because they want to listen carefully and really process thoroughly and then speak when they have something definitive to say. But the silence communicates in a room full of senior leaders that you don't have a perspective or that you're not confident enough to share it. And neither of those is the signal that you want to send. You don't have to have the final word. You don't have to be certain. Just get involved early in the direction of the conversation. So I'm still working through this, but one thing I'm weighing is, before we move on, I want to bring X, which is relevant here. The question I believe we need to come back to is, it's language like that. It doesn't have to be certain. It's just directional. It tells the room there is a thinking and engaged leader right here. And then the third thing is to make your work legible to whoever needs to see it, the people who really need to see it. Before you share any significant piece of work, ask yourself, does leadership understand the value of what I just delivered? Not the details, not the methodology, the value of it. Because maybe your manager knows, but the leaders above your manager, the ones who are going to be in that room when your name comes up, they may have almost no visibility into what you're producing and what it's making possible. Legibility sounds like, instead of saying, here's what we did, you're going to say, here's what this changes. Here's what this impacts. Instead of saying, we delivered the project on time, you're going to say, we delivered on time, which means we're now positioned to launch the pilot in Q3, 2 months ahead of where we were 6 months ago. It's the same work you're doing, but now you're shaping it. The impact has a shape and it connects to something that leadership really cares about. Now that is visibility, and visibility in the way that they can really see and that really matters. You know, a client said to me something that I've thought about a lot since. She'd been working really hard for years, doing great work, real work, and she'd been waiting patiently and faithfully for it to pay off. And one day she said to me, I just thought if I worked hard enough, eventually someone would notice. And I said, they do notice, just not what you think. They notice how you think. They notice how you communicate. They notice how you show up, not just in the quality of your work, but in the quality of your presence, your perspective, your voice in the room. And when those things shift, everything shifts. Not overnight, but steadily, visibly, unmistakably. Great work is the foundation. You need it. It matters. Don't stop doing it well. But advancement is driven by something that sits on top of that foundation. And that great work alone does not automatically produce how others experience your leadership. The question is not just, am I delivering? The question is, what am I communicating? What am I demonstrating? What am I signaling to the people above me about who I am and what I'm ready for? And that, unlike talent or timing or circumstance, that is something you can shape starting right now. So here's your question for this week. Just one question. Am I showing people what I do, or am I showing people how I think? Sit with that, because the answer will tell you exactly where the gap is between the work you're doing and that signal you're sending. And if the honest answer is, well, I'm showing them mostly what I do, then your assignment is really simple. Pick one meeting this week, one update, one conversation with your manager. And before you go in, ask yourself, what does this work actually mean? What does it inform? And what would I recommend? And then say it out loud. That's it. That's the whole assignment. Because the moment you shift from reporting your work to framing your work, from showing people what you did to showing them how you think, you stop being seen purely as a high performer and you start being seen as someone who's ready for more. So go make it happen. I'll see you next week.